Good evening, everybody. The topic of this talk is, now that we have it, what do we do with it? So how maths and stats can save us from drowning in big data. So I'm a professor of statistics here at QUT, and I'm part of the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence in Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers. So the Maths and Stats Centre of Excellence involves about 50 researchers and about the same number of postgraduate students across 4 different states, and we focus on bringing together mathematics, statistics and machine learning activities and research into solving real-life problems in healthy people, sustainable environments and prosperous societies. So it's a very exciting centre for maths and stats across Australia, and it involves going from theory through methods, computation and application. And we have a large node here at QUT. We have 5 chief investigators across maths, stats and machine learning, and we have a large number of researchers and postgrads, many of whom are here tonight. So I want to start with this scene here. I want to take you to my place, and we're sitting here, and when we look out here, I'm sitting on the deck here, and if this works, a minute ago. Oops. So we're sitting, I'm trying to get the little play thing. Oh, here it goes. Okay, so we're sitting here, and not a lot is happening, but some things are happening, and there's some connectedness in this scene. And I'd like you to tell me what you see that is actually connected. What are the patterns? What are the commonalities in this scene? Okay, the branches moving backwards and forwards.
There's current in the river.
Current in the river. How is current in the river connected to other things in the picture? The wind. What else? The direction of the boats. The movement of the people, perhaps. And even if we peered into the people moving, if we looked inside their heads, we would see the same kinds of patterns, perhaps, as we would see in the rivers. If we looked at the environment, we might see the same kinds of things that are happening in the people. If we looked at the industry here, the energy, the boats, this is a flight path as well, we would see the same kinds of patterns, same but different, when we look under the actual objects. If we look into the objects, we'd see the same kinds of patterns, and all of it is being driven by data. So data then can inform us about these different sorts of objects and different sorts of aspects of our lives, like environment, health, and people, and it can tell us about how we might learn to understand those through data. So big data takes different forms for very many people. This was an ad for big data that we've seen, and this is about selling a product. But data, of course, is all around us, and the way that we might see big data, some people might say this is big data, and other people go, well, this is really big data, and this is really, really big data, and it's like, no, this is a knife, and no, this is a knife. And so we come to look at big data, and one of the ways that we've been describing it is inconveniently large. So it's data when you have more data than you know what to do with. So how do we actually save ourselves from drowning in all that data? Well, the data are coming from very many areas. We're getting data from social media, from enterprise data, from sensors and devices, and this is just exploding in the nature of the data and the amount that we have. The number of internet-connected devices has actually surpassed the global population, which is amazing, but it's also now past 3 times the number of internet devices per person. And by 2020, it's going to double that. So there is a lot of possibility for information and data in our world. So I want to look at 3 areas that were in the title of this, this talk. How is healthy people, sustainable environments, prosperous societies related? And in particular, how is cancer, coral reefs and airports, how are they related? So let's get to the first one, which is coral reefs. So coral reefs here are a big topic, the Great Barrier Reef in our world, because, or in Australia, it's under review by UNESCO at the moment, and it's under threat, as we know, from many different kinds of advertising campaigns, media campaigns, reports, studies, and so on. The Barrier Reef is one of the world's largest living structures. We can see it from the moon, and it's a great asset to Australia to have this at our doorsteps. But we know there are threats to the reef, and we wish to understand what those threats are and predict then what's going to happen in the future and how we might manage the reef for a prosperous tomorrow. So the kinds of data that we have from the reef are many and varied. Here's a map of the reef, and you can see the extent of it here, right down the coast of Queensland. And our first data source then is observations. So this is our monitoring plan from the Australian Institute for Marine Sciences and from recreational divers, from other sources, other studies that are being done, where observations are being taken of the reef. So here are some sort of holiday photos from recently from us, and I have to pay tribute to the photographer who's up there, because otherwise he complains that he takes nice photos and nobody takes any notice of the photographer. So here we are snorkeling on the reef, and we can see the kinds of coral and the beauty of this reef here, and we can see different diversity in the coral types, the amount of coral cover, and the fish and other organisms that live on this reef. In fact, we did a study just recently, how many species live on a coral reef. So here are all the different types of corals that we might see, and we ask ourselves, how do we actually monitor or take data for this? So we might, for example, look at the proportion of coral cover. We might look at the biodiversity in the fish, and we keep tabs of this across the space of the reef and across time. We might look at particular species. So here's Nemo here, and in fact Nemo and all Nemo's friends. So if one question was how many species of a particular type, or how many individuals of a particular species are at a site, what would be your answer? How many clownfish are in this picture? Tell me. Now you're swimming along, you've only got about 10 seconds to count them. 6. Okay, who found 5? Few, yeah, okay, so there's our observation error, okay, or observation variation, we could kindly say. And so, but there are 6 in here. So you can see that counting through observations is really useful, and we might have some of it, but it can be limited in its scope, and it can also be subject to observation error. So we can also be looking for things that threaten the reef. So the threats to the reef. What's the threat in this picture? Crown of thorns. So the crown of thorns here, we can see, and I'll blow it up so you can see it now, is one of the scourges of the reef. Can you see where it is in that picture? Yeah? So the crown of thorns then is something that we may want to monitor, but we have to be able to see it. And so how do we see it? Well, we can use observations, but we can also use other data as well. And so the kinds of data that we might use, which avoid having people in the water, are from sensors. So for example, underwater unmanned vehicles. And so these UAVs can be deployed to seek out different features of the reef, like crown of thorns, and they can also be used for just general monitoring in areas that are inaccessible or too time-consuming for regular divers. And we also have then remotely sensed data. So these are satellite data that are circling the Earth. We have them coming over twice a day where we can get information for the reef. So they give us images like this at a large scale, where, for example, we can see plumes that are coming out of the river systems, out of the catchment areas here, and we need to monitor that for the health of the reef. And we also get more local remotely sensed data, like this LiDAR information here. So this is a transect of LiDAR, and what we want to be able to do from this is identify patterns and change. So different kinds of remotely sensed data that is going to be combined with our sensor data, which is going to be combined with our observations to let us learn more about the reef. And the last source that I want to mention is the internet data. So there's a lot of social media about the reef. And if we look at that social media then, we may be able to look at patterns in there about who's talking to whom and what is being talked about in the social media sphere. So now that we have all these data, the question is, what are we going to do with it? Well, as statisticians, what we want to be able to do is model it. Now, modelling means a lot of different things to different people. So my sister is in fashion design, and she talks, when I talk about developing a model and the interest we have in models, she says, Kerry, like I have a very different picture of what you're talking about when I develop a model. So different people talk about models in many different areas, and what we want to do is we want to be able to use as statisticians getting the data and using those data to develop a mathematical description of what we see in a system. So we want to be able to learn about clusters. What patterns are emerging in the system of interest? What are the drivers or the factors that are causing responses or associated with responses in that system? And how do we make predictions about that system as well? So they're the kinds of things that we want to do as statisticians. So our statistical model might look something like this. We have our data and we try to describe what that data looks like in a mathematical framework. We then take the process. We say, all right, well, how is that data, if we see it, what's the process that's generating those data? And then we ask, what are the features or the parameters of that process that's driving that process? So here's the data. What's the process that's generating that data? What are the parameters that are generating that process? And then we look at what are the things that we're actually interested in. So in this case, the disturbances and the cumulative effects on the reef. So what are the major factors that are affecting the health of the reef? So what did we learn when we did this study? Well, by combining all of these data, we could see that the patterns of trends in the reef were different for different areas. So in general, we saw in the inner reef a very sort of stable system overall, but in the outer reef, we saw these big peaks and troughs. Now, if we look at individual sites, we see even more variation. So when there's a debate, for example, about how the reef is tracking, then it's very easy for people to pick up different aspects at different scales to make their argument. So they might pick up, for example, the inner reef and say, look, everything is stable. They might pick up part of the outer reef time period and go, oh, it's all increasing, it looks great, or oh, it's all decreasing, it looks great, it looks terrible, or that there's some sort of cyclic pattern. They might pick up for individual sites, there's even more variation. And then when we look at what the cumulative effects are or the threats are for the reef, we see that those two are site-specific. So if we look within this, we can see the different kinds of patterns across time at the different sites. So here are different sites. We have Cooktown, Lizard Island, Cairns, Townsville, Whitsunday, the Swains, and Capricorn Bunker. And each of these bars is representing a different kind of trend. So S is a stable trend, I is increasing, D is decreasing. So where you see ID, it means increasing, decreasing. So we have this sort of pattern over time. So you can see here that if we look at the reef as a whole, we see that the stable trend is the most common sort of trend because that's our inner reefs here. But we also see our second most common trend is an increasing and decreasing trend. So we see a great threat here that we have a reef that is increasing in coral cover in this case, and then mainly decreasing after that. And then we get different kinds of patterns where we have strictly decreasing here, and only here do we start to see a decrease followed by an increase. And if we look at the variation across the different sites, we see that these kinds of patterns really differ by the different sites. But importantly here, we're able to pick out through the statistical modelling that we're doing and using all these different data that there is a real threat. There's a real threat. Many of these sites are stable, but there are many that are decreasing as well. So then we ask, what are the major drivers for this kind of decrease? So here you can see the major drivers that were found through the modelling that we conducted. So this is work by Julie Versaloni. We looked at the relative influence of different factors across the reef. And which one is most important here? COTS. Okay? So we see here the crown of thorns starfish. That little fellow that you saw in that picture is the most pervasive threat of the reef. I think of these like zombies of the sea. You know, they wait and they breed in their millions. Carla can tell us more about it. Here's our COTS expert up the back here. They breed in their millions and then they climb up the walls of the reef and then they eat their way over it like zombies. Okay, so here's our starfish here, crown of thorns starfish. And so we ask now, this brings us to a management decision, what are we going to do about that? And so what we can do is bring together our data expertise here at QUT and our robotics expertise at QUT. And those sensors, those underwater UAVs that you saw there, are going to be built in micro style. The plan is to build these as micro sensors, UAVs, deploy them like little drones of the sea, and send them out to scout for these COTS and spear them. Okay? Now, all of that is like spear them. I'm not quite sure how that works because I do the data side, but the robotics people do that bit. But the idea is that this is what's going to happen. Of course, we can't just send them out into the Great Barrier Reef. You saw the size of it. How do we send them out and know where they're going? We need the data, and we need the stats, and we need the predictive models to say where are we going to send them. And so we need to use all of our information then to make good decisions about where to send our little drones to be able to manage these fellows and support the improvement of the reef. So the second topic that I want to cover is this one, which is cancer. So cancer affects all of us very personally. It's one of the major health risks in our country and in our world. And every one of us, I'm sure, has been touched by cancer in some way. So it's a real need also to understand this very complex disease. And the data sources that we have for this are, again, the same kinds of data sources that we had for the reef. We have observations and sensors and images. And we have those at not the site level and overall, as with the reef, but the individual level and the area level. And so what sort of data do we have then? At the area level, we have observations, the numbers of people that have been diagnosed with cancer or their survival times, and we want to map that across Queensland. So this was a project with Cancer Council Queensland, and they're going to be mapped at the area of the statistical local area. So these are 478 areas delineated in Queensland, and looking at the relative survival, for example, of different sorts of cancers in these little areas. This allows then managers to make more management-oriented decisions, and also allows us to ask questions like, does where we live impact on our cancer survival? So the second source of data is actually not at the area level, but at the individual level. So we come again to somebody who has cancer, and I'm sorry, Andrew, but just diagnosed you here. Okay, so Andrew here is going to be undergoing chemotherapy, and one of the concerns that he may have is chemo brain. Okay, so chemo brain is, does anybody know about this? Yeah? Okay, so a couple of people do. Chemo brain is the impact of, the idea that the impact of chemotherapy and radiotherapy or cancer treatment has an impact on your cognitive abilities. So your short-term memory, your long-term memory, your executive function, where you put the keys, you know, all that kind of thing. And so people talk about it, but there's a real question about whether it's real. And if it's real, then who is it affecting? Because it's not affecting everybody. So the question is, who will be affected by chemo brain? So here's an example of the kind of test that's given. You have 30 seconds to look at these words and remember as many as you can, okay? And it's going to be a quick 30 seconds because it's just a quick talk. So here we go. Okay, start to remember. Right, that's long enough. Right, I want you to turn to the person beside you or somebody else, and I want you to recite as many words as you know together. Remember how many there are. Find somebody if you need to go. Okay, let's see how well you went. You ready? How many did people get? 6? 8? 4? 6? 8? All right, let's see. Here are the words again. Tell me how many you got right. Who got 12 of them? 10? 10 or 11? 8 or 9? Yay, we've got some stars. Okay, 6 or 7? 4 or 5? 3 or 4? Okay, so it's really scary when you think that you get 4 or 5, and then if you're affected by chemo brain, then you might get 1 or 2. Okay, so this is what we're interested in. These are the kinds of short-term tests and long-term memory tests that people were given, and also tests of cognitive function to assess their behaviour or their cognitive status as they go through chemotherapy and after chemotherapy. The second kind of data are from sensors. So these are brain sensors. These are ways that the brain is firing, and you see the kinds of patterns here in the signals. So parts of your brain will just be dawdling along, okay, and then something will activate them, and you can see the activation, okay, and then they dawdle along, and then they'll activate again. And so different parts of your brain are hopefully activating at different times, okay. For many people, I know in lectures especially, like they don't activate very much until it's sort of coffee time or going home time or something, okay? But that's the kind of behaviour that we see. So the third source of data are from images. And again, these are not the satellite images that we saw in the environment, but they're still images, and they're still the same kind of data that we still can use the same kinds of methods to analyse and get out the kind of information that we want. So these images are from CAT scans, X-rays, MRI scans, and you'll see here an example of what happens in a scan. This is from over here at the Mater, who I was told to remind you is one of the most accurate and precise places you can have radiotherapy in Australia, if not the world. But you can see there the way that the dose is being delivered to the tumour. And so what we've got on the right-hand side here in this picture is an image of the dosage that is actually delivered to different parts of or to the surrounding tissue when the radiation is delivered. So the aim of the game is to be able to identify the tumour and to be able to deliver the dose accurately to that tumour without affecting the other organs of the body. Okay, so you can see there the way that the healthy organ, we need to protect that. And so if we need to protect it, then there's going to be some conservative action on the part of the radiotherapist. And if we have to have a dose directed at a site and we're not so sure about whether it's being directed or not to that site, then we need to have a larger region. So what we want to do is if we can deliver that dose more accurately, we can reduce the area that's affected, and we can also be less conservative and give a bigger dose because we know that we're not going to affect the other organs. So how do we get that dose to be better delivered? There's two things that we can do. One is from the image to be able to identify where that tumour is, and that's the same kind of procedure as identifying where a crown of thorns starfish is in an environmental image. We need to do image recognition from that picture. The other thing is to be able to use other data to help us to identify the amount of dosage and where to direct it. And so that other data can come from other images that are being taken in the radiotherapy. So those of you that have undertaken radiotherapy, there's a major scan that you have at the beginning of radiotherapy and then daily treatments. Each day is done as if that's the only day, but of course we've got all the backup information. So if we as statisticians can combine the image that you have at day 1 with the image that you have at day 2, that'll help with the prediction at day 3. And then if we combine the next image, that will help with the prediction at day 4. And so for individuals, we can improve the prediction by being able to aggregate these data day to day and then learn more about that image and the way that we might then direct the dose more accurately and precisely to the tumour. So now that we have it, again, what do we do with it in this cancer setup? Well, again, we want to model it. We want to be able to build a statistical description of cancer and the features of cancer, like chemobrain. We want to identify clusters. So for chemobrain, the people who are going to respond differently and the same to chemotherapy with respect to their cognitive function. We want to understand patterns. So how will they respond? How will we be able to pick up patterns in our images? We want to understand the drivers, the factors that are affecting the system of interest, and we want to be able to predict from it. So in statistical modelling then, the way that we can do this is to use, at the area scale, is each of these areas is very small. And so what we're going to do is what other information do we have about that? Well, we have the information in the image itself. So each of those areas, we're going to say looks like the areas around it. And so we're going to share information from neighbouring areas to help us estimate at each area. Okay, so it'd be like if I'm trying to predict your features here, and you hang out with these two people here a lot, then I might say, well, there are some features about them that can help me to predict about you. And similarly with Nick, now he hangs out with the two people beside him there, so there might be some features that we can use about Zing and Earl to help us understand about Nick. Okay? And so some of you might say you'd like to go and sit somewhere else in the room. Okay, but if yes?
I'd like to sit somewhere else.
Right. So you can see how we might use neighbouring information at sites to be able to help us to predict the site. So the information, the big data, may not come from other sources. It can come from the same source, but we use it better. And so statistics is about using our data well and being able to aggregate these different kinds of data. And we end up then with maps like this, where we're being able to represent the data to tell us about the risk across the state. So this is the relative risk of, in this case here, breast cancer across the state. And anything above 1 is an increased risk compared to the baseline. Anything below is more protective. And you can see the big areas of increased risk are in our rural and remote areas. So what did we learn? Well, we learned that rural and remote areas do have differences compared to urban areas with respect to their survival and also the incidence of cancer. So there was a lot of publicity about this when we released the Atlas of Cancer here for Queensland, and a lot of this publicity has resulted then in change in management practice for where we deploy mobile scanning services and also cancer services across the state. Now this is now being expanded to a national cancer atlas, which will be digital, and so hopefully then we'll be able to being able to click on the area where you live and see what the risks are for cancer in your area. And imagine now then we have that kind of atlas and we can overlay that with environmental information, demographic information, socioeconomic status information, economic information, and so on, and we start to learn much more about the world of us and of cancer and of health in general. So what did we learn about ChemoBrain? Well, we learned that there are really 3 types of groups of people. The first is the people who start off at a particular level of cognitive function, and as they go through chemotherapy, their cognitive function declines, and then after a short time, it returns to normal. Okay, so that's by far the largest group. There is a group that's similar, but take longer to respond. And maybe they don't get to the same level after they do respond, but they do, respond quite well, but it just takes longer. So here's the longer time span here for them to respond. And there is a small group that even after 5 years of the study still have not responded. So this is the group then that we want to understand more about. Because if we can understand the drivers for this group, then we can put in place better management practices to help them to restore or to keep their cognitive function. So the factors that we found that were important in this group, and this is ongoing work, is age, their IQ, initial IQ through a national adult reading test, the stage of the cancer, and a functional assessment of cancer therapy, so what they're able to do at the time. So these are just small steps so far in using the data to be able to understand who's going to be affected by ChemoBrain and then hopefully reduce the impact for those people. What did we learn about treatment? We learned that through this method of being able to use different sources of information, we can get from fuzzy pictures like this to much more defined pictures like this. We can increase the accuracy of identifying images or parts of the image from something like 41% accuracy for a lung to 88% accuracy for the lung. Something like, for the liver, 4% accuracy to 69% accuracy. So you can see that by using this other information, we've been able to dramatically increase the accuracy of identification of the features in the tissue and in the body, I should say, and then that means then that we can much more accurately deliver dosages of radiation. And this work is being implemented and incorporated at the Mater at the moment. And I just wanted to put this picture up. This is a gratuitous picture, but I wanted to show you from the network analysis that we looked at for the social media for the environment. This is another network analysis that's been done on viruses. So this is viruses that may be associated with cancers and how they spread through the body. So this is work that's been done using the same techniques, but learning then how these viruses might spread through the body. And so we can learn about human health just the same way as we can learn about the environment, using the same sorts of data, even though it's different, and using the same kinds of statistical methods to get there. The last topic is this one. Now, how many of you have been in this sort of situation at an airport? Yeah, okay. Those who didn't put their hands up are lucky, okay. This is congestion at an airport. It's a very, very well-known problem. And the question is, what causes it and what can we do about it? Now, that's a big problem. And the problem is, not just in the airport itself, but also exacerbated in the sky. So this is an actual real picture over Manila. And you have to be glad every time you feel like your plane is delayed, then you just have to remember this picture to feel better about it, okay? So the same thing we can do here is looking at modelling the system. So now we have all the same sorts of things we want to do. We want to understand clusters, we want to do prediction, we want to understand patterns, but we have to now take into account the infrastructure of the airport, the people, the environment, the economics. How do we do all of that, and how do we collate all of that information into a single model? Well, the kinds of models that we have, that we do this with, are called complex systems models. Surprise, surprise. So we want to look at a model of a complex system. And so the way that we might think about this, and I'm just going to describe it briefly, is we think about mind mapping the problem first. So what are the factors that affect congestion at an airport? Tell me. Number of flights? Customs? Yep, how many passengers? Day of the week. So imagine now we're looking at congestion and we put all of these sorts of factors. What affects congestion? And what affects those factors? And how are they related? So we're going to build a model that has, here's our target, what are the factors that affect that target, and what are the factors that affect those factors, and how are they all interrelated? So that's our nice mind map. And that might include social and human behaviour, it might include the infrastructure, it might include external factors, it might include environment, it might include economics and so on. And then we quantify it using all of the different sources of information that we might have from the different places that we've talked about, and we quantify that model, and then we can use the quantification and we can run the data through the model to tell us what the overall probability of a congested airport will be. And then if we decide to change one of the things, what happens if I change the way that the planes come in? What happens if I change the configuration of the airport? What happens if I put more people in the airport who tell people what to do and where to go? Which of those is more advantageous in an investment sense in order to reduce the congestion? And those kinds of models, those network models, those Bayesian network models, are things that we use across environment, across people, across industry, in many different countries, and are very effective for looking at that big picture, complex system using many sources of data. So that brings us then to our final figure again, which is where we started. So we're still sitting on the veranda looking out across the river. And now we see this picture with different eyes. We see it not as the trees or the people or the current. What we can see is that there are data, and that these systems here across environment and across health and across people and across industry are different but are the same. And we can use statistical models and we can use the wealth of data that we have to better understand these systems. So there's a guy who was a pilot in the Second World War, and the last letter that he wrote home was to his parents, and his name was John McGree. And so I've just doctored his poem because he won't remember because it's sort of a long time ago and died just soon after sending this letter. But it says, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on data-driven wings. With different eyes, I've seen with tumbling mirth the world anew. It reveals 100 things we have not dreamed of. And while with mathematics eyes I've trod, I've put out my hand and I've touched the face of God. Good night, everybody.